like QR and like people to scan and they land on a page where there is a like survey kind of.
Yeah.
Then if I wanted to project the survey question, I just need my.
Do you want to extend your desktop so you have two
Okay,
print?
perfect. Like, I just change everything that I change here.
Yeah, it's the same. So you're all good. And then don't worry about people who are online. They can see kind of this general area,
Okay.
but they're just kind of observing remotely, kind of passively, and that's kind of it. I have it streaming. The link is not live until.
This is not related to like the desktop change the.
It'll change your size because of this projector.
No, like this is not my desktop picture.
Well, I don't know. Sorry, I don't know how that. That's not. It changed. So that's an Apple one. But yeah, that's it.
Okay.
So yeah, okay. And then we'll have someone from Pearl, the Indonesia, will be in here to help facilitate any tech or any other issues. I'll make sure there's.
And the questions online that I put to them now.
Don't worry about them. You're just dealing with people in here.
Okay.
Yeah. You're good to go. Okay, sweet.
See you later.
Yeah. I'll be in to take a couple pictures, so I might pop in and out. So yeah.
See you. Drama.
It's cold.
The AC, like I'm freezing in every room that you're on.
Chuẩn đấy, sẽ cái camera này. Chụp lại ở đây thì đủ mò này. Có cái chán. Đánh. Ui này. Nó sợ cái đi tăng thêm nguyên phở nữa.
Từ đa dụng của con chám đó những ông to trong hàng mía thuộc Hollywood tầm ra liên mua càng với bầy hay lắm.
Oh.
Are you enjoying the conference so far?
Sorry?
Are you enjoying the conference?
Yeah. We learn more. We learn
You're
more
also
about the
working
new session. Yeah. Because it is the first time for me to join it.
You're with Chamdai?
Yeah, I'm from Chamdai. How about you? Where do you come from?
Freedom Slaves.
Freedom Slaves.
I'm from Italy.
Italy?
Yeah.
But you working based in Philippines, right?
No, this project we did in the Philippines, but it was just
okay.
one project.
Yes. That's great. Yes, climate change is the new trend currently that most of
Yeah.
people is focused on this year.
And a colleague of mine, she's from a university in the United States, but we are working a lot on these topics. I hope that she can join so she
Yeah.
can share more.
Definitely, our team will learn more from this root cause of human and how to correlate
Yeah.
human change. Đây tôi check cái stroke viên nước bạc trắng này.
Là không gì mà quên phải nước đậm ngon.
Cái đó nó đi vào. Các cái cam ấy.
Coffee nó không như này.
Thế này tôi đẩy.
Mình cho
Go we don't know.
The type first.
Yes, I think I'm
So
gonna
you will
say.
show me.
Yes, yeah.
Really?
Sing out of chat. I don't remember it.
15 không chiều. Vấn đề là trong điện thoại đến diện là
Go we don't know.
Cái này tôi tắt cái này. Kon boleh. Punya pimon mau mantra ke mana? Mantra ke macam BP boleh ni. Biar ada. Các anh em điều này, cho nên việc chọn nó bây giờ là mình cảm thấy được cả, chẳng là không rõ. Và mấy cái hai trường hợp có thị trường hiện mai ở đây cả đây là chân, cả đây là xoay nặng, cả đây cái còn cả đây là chúng bảo đây là trường hợp của mai và chúng bán miền chạm tay cái là tôi nên và ta có start hàng của đi với ta thì tôi để mặt ở đây này còn khác cái ta kia ta phải học tôi là tiền nữa này có tên con này cái ta có chứ có mình còn nghe coi như cái bạn bên của cái bạn bên của này Rồi sẽ gồm còn bên này và nhớ không phải mà chạy ba có kia hôn bóng phát đất mà nó làm nên bánh nhỉ quy định một số đấy tại này này bóng quy trăm được đủ sạp đấy chúng ta cái luật cơ nó quy định được có hai bàn bóng cây một các cái bóng quy trăm quy định này nó chẳng có này nó chú đặt hết là cái hết này nhà cái kế này một con xe đây nào ok này nhà bao nhiêu chậm và miếng đó thì đúng nó chặt đặt nó lớn chứ này chạm bao nhiêu miếng này lên miếng này lại
không phải
chỗ này đâu chậm được một miếng nhà bao nhiêu đấy nhưng đây toàn sáng như cái mùa vừa thì con lên lại do hai cái đài của trên đủ tiêu này đầu tiên là chạm của cái càng đi không bị dùng cái xây còn cái thời ca bắt chất hiện đẹp hai nhà là ở càng đi vỡ hai là gì vỡ chạy tới dưới mình lôi ra tới chạy nhà chém cái sáng dưới không rầy chẳng này mà thật là bên càng đây mà chạy dưới không rầy là bây giờ chặt đá từ sáng dưới có những cái chặt do mình quy có trăm tích của con không nhận được là từ đó là bạn ở đây ông ơi nó không cơ cao một cái ao này liền đấy từ sáng đến buổi tối chạy tiếp nhưng mà làm ăn còn sao được bạn đó của đây đây như hơi nặng cao cả chỗ của mình là họ đây cả đi họ chơi với cái này chế giống máy sẽ có cái làm gì đó con mà thành á bao lời này bao thời ca con này chú ý đặt khi anh cái xã chỗ này thành một cái vài cái anh ta ok excellent Cần bong đặt cho hai bong nhỏ anh Nguyễn đặt về bong vậy cả cái nào cũng biết bong này nó sẽ
Năm ngày từ donor bạn viết mất đâu của má từ donor chứ tâm thon mà đá mà sao mình đang nhiều của bạn mới làm được gì về ai sẽ chỉ mà từ donor một con từ dừng đó hay dừng sống còn việc này vẫn nó không phải gì
member masih contoh kader jadi hashtag ini si kami berjumpa nah memang emailnya ku coba sama
còn ba này còn một min personal matter nó còn đấy mà bắt xong thì liên quan đến ông nơi nào mà bắt xong tin nhắn xong rồi
một đằng mấy
tiền tay là bài email tới con số ai rồi này
đây là này của mặt email là cho chẳng có cái mặt tên nó cho nhé kemarin dapat nyampe level manajemen teh buat discuss sana kini discuss member contribution ke Indonesia posisi karena sendiri awal Indonesia tới bị ai tham gia chạy cái bàn vậy
cái nó còn như là 4 môn nữa xong nhau lên tăng lên rồi nó
Venture until help me. Him parties already a couple of times. Hi everyone. So thank you so much for joining. I think let's give it another minute for everyone who might be on the stairs on the way and I'm excited. Okay, so once again, thank you so much for joining this breakout session. We are going to talk about climate change and human trafficking and how these two phenomena intersect and what that means. And to do that, I'm going to present a research that we did last year at Free the Slaves, focusing on the Philippines. So what I'm going to present refers specifically to the Philippines, but we can discuss later on if that's something that could be generalized to other contexts as well, and how so. A couple of words on Free the Slaves, my organization, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Our mission is to change the conditions that allow modern slavery to exist. So we want to reduce people's vulnerability, intervening on those factors that make them more exposed to the risk of being trafficked. In terms of scope, we are headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we are present and active globally, from Caribbean, Latin America, to Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. We've been around for 24 years, and in these many years, we've supported more than 50,000 people in trafficking to regain their freedom. We have helped more than 650,000 people to be more resilient to the risk of trafficking through education, outreach campaign, awareness raising, and we've contributed to putting more than 300 traffickers behind bars. A couple of words on how we work so that you can put this research in the wider context of our organization. We have 4 pillars of action. One is policy and advocacy, so we work closely with governments to encourage them to pass legislation that is more appropriate to address human trafficking, but not only to pass legislation, also to then make sure that they enforce laws and policies that they are approved. Community engagement, we provide communities with the essential services to make them more aware, make them more resilient, provide them with the skills and the tools that make them stronger against the risk of human trafficking. Movement building, we don't act in isolation, so we're always happy to work in partnerships with local organizations, regional organizations, networks, international organizations, to join forces, join resources, and make sure that our actions are more impactful. And finally, and this is where this presentation comes into the picture, we have research. So we carry out research projects to inform our programs, our advocacy campaigns, to make sure that what we do is informed by accurate evidence and data. Now, before I get into the presentation, I put this together. It's not a quiz, so you don't need to have any kind of knowledge on climate change and human trafficking to do that. It's meant to be something short and fun for us to do together, to see as a group of people working in human trafficking, as a group of experts, what do we think about climate change and human trafficking. So again, no knowledge required, not meant to test your knowledge, just to see what we think about these issues. So if you can scan this QR code, you will land on a page. Then when you land on the page, don't do nothing yet, because then we get us started. So when you get there, if you can maybe raise your hand, so I get a sense of how many are there yet. Welcome. Did you manage to get on the page? Okay, perfect. Don't do anything yet. You're almost there. Thank you. I hope everyone got a chance to scan the QR code, so I'm changing my screen. Okay, is everyone ready? Can you see this question on your phone? Okay, so we can go ahead. How would you assess your knowledge of the intersection between climate change and human trafficking? It can be extensive, satisfactory, limited, or very limited.
I didn't see this question in my...
You couldn't see it? Okay, thank you. For those of you who couldn't get the QR code, I'm putting this on your phone, so maybe you can pass it around with you. Thank you. Okay, so that's interesting. As of now, we have 13 people among us saying that they believe they have a limited knowledge on how climate change and human trafficking intersect. One says satisfactory, and two even very limited, which is totally fine because it's new things that only very recently in the human trafficking movement we are starting to explore and try to unpack. Okay, so numbers are going up. I move to the second question. Through which pathways do you think that climate change amplifies vulnerability to human trafficking? Meaning, how do you think that climate change is making people more vulnerable? I give an example of something that will come up later today, through loss of livelihoods. So because of climate change, people are no longer able to engage in their traditional activities, there is a loss of livelihoods. So poverty is one example. So think of any word that comes to your mind on how climate change can be a contributing factor to vulnerability. You can put more than one word, but you don't have to. Okay, good, good. So we have loss of livelihood, conflict, very interesting one, refugees, exactly, so displacement because of climate change, conservative leaders, migration, great. So we see migration, refugees are kind of different words for the same phenomenon, but it's hard to follow. No income, poverty, again, conflict, food insecurity, great. Like not great itself, but interesting. Stress migration, wow, you guys are very creative. Love that. Thank you. Education, refugees, breakdown of protection, disasters, global warming, problems with farming. No income, that's great. So I think some of the factors that are emerging here, and because we are using each of us is putting its own word, maybe it's not as clear, but poverty, conflict, displacement, migration, becoming a refugee are some of the things that many of us are identifying as ways to which climate change is impacting vulnerability. Let's move on. How do you think that human trafficking occurs in climate change affected contexts? We have a few options here. Traffickers lure potential victims, so they go in climate change affected areas and they try to lure victims, or people make desperate decisions that may lead to trafficking because of climate change. Both options seem likely, or other. If you have in mind another way in which human trafficking can be occurring, you can put other, and then I would ask you to maybe expand on this if you feel comfortable with that. Okay, so it seems that most of us are agreeing that in a context affected by climate change, we can see both people taking desperate decisions and both traffickers going and trying to find the victims among people that have been affected by climate change through some of the pathways that we see before, right? Poverty, conflict, migration, displacement, food insecurity, and so on. Okay, let's move on. I promise we're almost done. Now, some groups of people, and that's true not only in climate change affected contexts, it's true of human trafficking in general, seem to be more vulnerable to the risk of human trafficking in climate change affected contexts. This includes which groups of people do you think that may be more vulnerable when we have a climatic event that has harmful impacts on our community? As we know, human trafficking affects people differently, even within the same community. Okay, that's great. I see already some answers popping up. Children, youths, farmers, global south in general, so communities, people living in the global south. Children again, very good. Fresh graduates, and perhaps people that are finding themselves with the knowledge and skills but hard to find employment. Women, ethnic minorities, great. Marginalized groups, low-income communities, vulnerable groups. That's great. Migrant workers, okay, this is great. We're having a lot of great, inputting a lot of great ideas, and all of these groups make sense as categories that would be more and most vulnerable in a context affected by climate change. Thank you. And now the very last one. And at the end, if you're interested, I can share the results of this little survey that we're having so that you can keep it for your own knowledge of what as a group we're thinking. Finally, okay, some people already answered. I don't know how that happened, but that's great. Who is most responsible for addressing the intersection of climate change and human trafficking? Governments, NGOs, CSOs, local communities, international community, or some other actor or stakeholder that you may think about. And this is a ranking kind of exercise, so if I remember correctly, you have to move these options up and down. So for the moment, it looks like most of us think governments are the main responsibles, followed by probably NGOs, international community, and local communities. Also, I see that some of us put other. Those of you who put other, if you feel comfortable, would you like to raise your hand and tell us who you're thinking about in terms of responsibility for addressing climate change and human trafficking? Yes.
Not only
for governments, I'm from the USA, so thinking about my own government, USA.
Thank you.
I didn't put others, but I think the businesses.
Businesses. Thank you, John. That's great. That's a great input. Thank you for sharing that.
I also put in other, but I was thinking at everyone have the responsibility to responsible for the climate change.
Okay. So each of us, as a member of a local community of a country, has responsibility for doing something about this reality. That's also a great point. Okay, thank you so much for being everyone very proactive and engaging. I very much appreciate that. Now we're back to the research. So a few things already came up as we were doing this quick exercise. Vulnerability to human trafficking, as we all know, as people working in this space, is determined by different social, economic, cultural factors that act both at the individual level, at the household level, at the community level, and finally at the structural or systemic level. They can be conflicts, corruption, unemployment, gender inequality, harmful cultural norms, and many more. However, it's increasingly recognized that climate change is also one of these factors that is possibly increasing vulnerability to human trafficking. How so? From my own experience doing a bit of research on this topic, I identified two main ways in which this can happen. On the one hand, we have illegal activities of resource extractions, for instance, gold mining, that are typically relying on forced labor and can become hotspots of sex trafficking, and they have a very harmful impact on the environment. So they act as a force multiplier for the negative effects of climate change. To give you an example, we did a research with freed slaves in Peru last year, and we find that in those areas where there is illegal activities of gold mining and logging, these activities are carried out with forced labor, extracted from local communities, and also these areas are hotspots of sex trafficking, with people from girls, women from all over the country being brought there to serve the sexual needs of minors and loggers. And these activities have a very harmful impact on the environment around them. They are living communities without access to their traditional activities of agriculture, of forestry, of husbandry, and dramatically some of those people that are losing everything in their community are those same people that end up working in forced labor conditions in these sectors. Second, and this is what we are going to see more in depth today, climate change creates and exacerbates conditions that make people more vulnerable to human trafficking. So create conditions whereby traffickers would be encouraged to go to these communities, go to these people and look for potential victims. But as many of you were rightly saying before, it also creates a condition of desperation in which people themselves take dramatic choices that may end up into a situation of trafficking, and they may be more or less aware of this. And again, we are going to see this later. So, in our research, we went to the Philippines, asking ourselves the question, how does climate change influence vulnerability to human trafficking in the Philippines? For those of you from the Philippines, we went to Eastern Visayas and Caraga in 4 communities. We did our research at the barangay level, at the very local level. And we carried out 40 interviews with community members, 8 focus groups within the communities. So basically 10 interviews for each community and 2 focus groups for each community. We did key format interviews with the local and regional government officials, NGO representatives, and the experts on climate change, experts on human trafficking. And finally, again, we had a validation workshop to bring some of those stakeholders together, review the findings, and think through them together in terms of formulating recommendations. So, what did we find out in these 4 communities? When it comes to preparing for a, I call it disaster, but probably more correct to say a climatic event, we found that preparation efforts were almost exclusively done in anticipation of a rapid onset event, which in these communities were mostly typhoons. So people consider those to be very dramatic events and they try to prepare for them. And it was also interesting to note that not only preparations were not done before slow onset events, meaning that they were considered something that happens slowly over time, so I don't need to prepare myself as much. It's something that will affect me in the future, so there was a kind of postponing mentality. Also, it was very interesting, though perhaps not so surprising, that preparations within the communities were not uniform. There was a lot of difference from one community member to another, and some of the factors that we found to be influencing both the willingness but also the capacity of a person to prepare for the event were age, awareness, location, family size, but not only family size, also the composition of the family. Families that have a disabled member, families that have a toddler to take care of, for families with an elderly person were more disadvantaged in terms of capacity to prepare. And here is what a community member told us. Can I ask you to read it for us, the orange part?
Oh, no.
When it was announced that there
was a typhoon.
a time that was Yolanda, I prepared alcohol, shop, Colgate, medicine, flashlight. Then I had a small ratio that is broken now, but we operated. Then set aside a little money, not in big quantity, but in small one. Then the rice, about 2 kilos, because there were just the 2 of us. And then the sardine noodle cake.
Thank you. So this is just an example from a community member of what they mean in terms of preparing. So setting aside the food and whatever they can to make it past in this case, the typhoon. Now, in terms of post-climatic event coping strategies, so we saw what communities are trying to do to prepare, what are they doing after something has happened to recover from this event. And here we are referring both to what the communities themselves try to do, but also to the kind of assistance that they receive or not receive from the government, from aid agencies, and so on. In terms of food relief packs, we were told that they were given, but only for immediate survival, not as something that was meant to create food security in the long term within the community. So there wasn't a positive feedback when it came to this kind of assistance. Housing assistance, we were told that it came, but it came quite late. Also, we were told that it was not based on a needs assessment, but rather housing assistance was given based on preferences, political connections, wealth of community members. So again, we see that there is a lot of difference in the way in which people recover to this kind of event. And also the kind of materials that they were given were of low quality, which meant that some people that had to repair or rebuild their house, they could do it, but with low quality materials. So the next time that a typhoon or flooding came, they ran again the risk of losing their house. Some people that we spoke with had their house heavily damaged more than once. Then cash for work programs. This is probably the only thing that we were spoken positively of, especially observed in the construction, whereby someone would be working in the reconstruction and the government provided some cash. But the only limitation that we were told of is that these are mostly targeted for a male workforce. So construction is clearly dominated by male workforce, and there wasn't an equal alternative for women. Healthcare assistance, it came, but again, we were told that it was inadequate and that it was exclusively focused on physical healthcare, so injuries or any kind of physical issue that the person may have experienced after being met in food or a similar event. Mental health care, which is also important after this kind of events, was completely neglected. And finally, scholarships, they came, but they were insufficient to keep all children in school. John, can I ask you to read what this person told us?
My eyes aren't good, I'm not able to read it.
Sorry.
After Yolanda, they said that the tech photo showed that there was no distinction between the rich and the poor. But actually, when you go back a month after, you would see who was able to recover and who was not.
So again, we see that because preferences and the process of distribution was not done in a fair and equal way, the way in which people could recover was very different from one community member to the other. Now, which kind of vulnerabilities did we find that this situation, with the difficulties in preparing and with the challenges, with the limitations in the capacity to recover, created within these communities? And here we can think of, before when we had a quick quiz of the pathways, what we call the pathways through which climate change leads to human trafficking. Because of course it's not climate change itself, it's what comes because of climate change. So specifically we found poverty, so individuals whose livelihoods depend on the environment, mostly in these communities it's farmers and fishermen. They find themselves in a situation of economic uncertainty. Also individuals that could no longer engage in their job. For instance, we spoke with an electrician, with a driver, with a shopkeeper. They lost their shop, they lost their merchandise. The street was not viable, so they couldn't drive for a considerable period of time, so they remained unemployed, and this created a situation of poverty, which becomes even worse if both people, both breadwinners within the family are equally affected. Displacement, those that lost their house, they couldn't repair it, they couldn't rebuild it. Many of them found themselves with no other choice but leaving the community and going somewhere else, either within the Philippines or abroad, looking for better options. Food insecurity, because this kind of events like food undermine the community's food supplies. They destroyed a lot of land, a lot of agricultural supplies, but also they affected the capacity of the community members to go and procure food, maybe because, again, the road was not viable, so they couldn't drive to the next closest town. There was a widespread situation of food insecurity, which also is affected by what we were saying before, that there were food packages delivered, but for the immediate aftermath, not for a long period of time. Health insecurity also. Medical infrastructure, medical supplies can get damaged, can get destroyed, the capacity of people to procure them is affected. And because of what we see at the beginning, poverty, unemployment, people have to cut their expenses within the families. And medical supplies often were one of the things that were given up. People may prefer to buy food for their children rather than buying the medical supplies for themselves. And finally, lack of access to education. This could happen either because education facilities, again, got destroyed, got damaged. Another thing, which I'm not sure how it would work in other countries, but in the Philippines, in these communities, schools are this kind of structure, this kind of building that within the community is turned into a shelter when there is this kind of event, which means that for a long period of time, the school, even if it's not damaged, is used as a shelter, so it can no longer play its function of being an education facility. And also because of families having to cut their expenses, It's not only medicine, it's also sending a kid to school may become a cost that I can no longer sustain. And this relates both to the direct cost, maybe I can no longer buy the supplies that are needed to go to school, but also the indirect cost. How much am I missing in terms of income by sending my kids to school, and how much can I earn if he or she goes to work instead? So, having said that, how do we go from vulnerability to exploitation? Because communities and some individuals, specifically within the communities, find themselves in condition of heightened vulnerability, human traffickers are well positioned to take advantage of affected individuals for exploitation. However, that's not only the full story, there's more to that. There's the fact that families are also prone to resort to harmful negative coping strategies that may lead to exploitation. And as I said before, and as we are going to see in a moment, this can be aware, I know that this is exploitation, but I feel that I have no other choice, or I'm not aware, I'm doing something that may be harmful and ultimately is going to lead to exploitation. So, the forms of exploitation that we found most common within these communities were forced labor and labor exploitation. So there were people that from these communities moved to other parts of the Philippines in the fishing sector, and there they found themselves in a situation of labor exploitation. Also in the construction sector, in those communities that are affected by climatic events or there is destruction, understandably so, construction becomes the only sector that offers a lot of jobs after the disaster. So many people that were farmers, electricians, losing their main activity, losing the possibility of continuing that activity, they transition towards the construction sector. But conditions there are quite exploitative. Labor exploitation in stream mining, that's also interesting because that's the kind of sector that also knows you can call it a boom after typhoon, after flooding, because the process of extracting gold from the rock becomes easier. So many people also would see these as a good option where to look for some job in a moment in which I have nothing better. And finally, we have domestic work, so trafficking for exploitation in domestic work, especially of young women, of girls, both within the Philippines but also abroad, mostly in the Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait. And we are talking about labor exploitation and forced labor in these sectors listed here because people that we spoke with reported a situation in which they had no health insurance, no life insurance, no social security benefits, they were not paid regularly, many times they had to wait long to get their wages. There was physical and psychological abuse, and for women working as domestic workers, the situation of having their documents withheld by the employers was very common. Again, we had some quotations here. I can read the one from the mother of a migrant worker. She said, my eldest daughter really wanted to travel abroad to work, but upon arriving in Saudi Arabia, I prayed a lot. My God, when I called to ask how she was doing, she told me that she felt like she was in prison in the big house, or she was unemployed. I think that was how it was. She really endured it for 2 years before she managed to take it back to the Philippines. Then we have many instances of child labor. So because families found themselves in a situation of extreme poverty, a situation of sending a child to work became very common. And this could be either after school, in the periods of school break, but most commonly we were told that it became a full-time substitute for school. And in these communities we found child labor in markets, in convenience stores, in agriculture, especially in tasks such as the husking the coconut nuts, in fishing, in tunnel mining, especially here because children are small in size, so they are used to go inside a small opening, light the dynamite and make the opening big for the other men to get inside. And then manufacturing. And I put a little star or asterisk on the side of those sectors where we were reporting conditions that are hazardous for children. Again, in testimony for a parent of a former child laborer, children will be fooled because they don't know about money. This happened to my child. He used to go to the mountain with a person. The person just gave him 20 pesos per day and a pair of slippers. He worked until the evening carrying sand. He couldn't sleep, he got too thin to use that. Now he no longer goes to school and he just wants to work. And he's only 12 years old. And this is just a testimony, but there are many others that we were reporting. Then we come to sex trafficking. That mostly affects young women and girls coming from rural, especially farming families whose family lose the income after situations such as typhoon, and they move to a bigger city within the Philippines, Cebu, Manila, to work in massage parlors, to work in hotels, to work in this kind of entertainment sector establishments, and then they find themselves in situations of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Most women are lured by traffickers themselves, so people that would on purpose go to the community, knowing of the situation going on, and offer a fake job to a girl, bring her to the city, and then exploit her. In other cases, we were told that some girls went there on their own initiative, maybe because they were told by a friend that there is a job in a certain place, in that certain city. And we couldn't have a clear assessment of whether in this case they would be aware to what extent and how that truly plays out. And again, in these cases, we're mostly talking about women and girls. A local worker in a local NGO told us that persons affected by disasters are more vulnerable to human trafficking. Some of our girls, so with whom this NGO works, their families are farmers, and then their farms were destroyed by a typhoon, so the daughter would be the one trying to find a job, and without knowing, she would be at risk of trafficking. And then we have the same phenomenon when it comes to children, commercial sexual exploitation of children that they on purpose treat as a separate phenomenon. Minors trafficked for commercial sexual exploitation in nightclubs, in bars, in brothels, in hotels, and other establishments. They are recruited in different ways by different people. They could be parents, friends, neighbors, other adults that are part of the circle of the child. And interestingly, foreigners are also heavily involved in the commercial sexual exploitation of children, either because they own and they manage the establishment where this exploitation takes place, and they go along with this, or they actually encourage it, or because they are the clients at the end of this exploitation, benefiting from this kind of situation. And something that we're going to see in a minute is that we were also told that the internet is playing a bigger and a bigger role in this process of exploiting children sexually. And this is what we treat separately as online sexual exploitation of children, that personally I found as the most disturbing component of this research, I guess because of the dynamics that characterize it, I'm going to tell you now. We were told that growing cases of commercial sexual exploitation, especially in communities of course affected by climate change and loss of livelihoods. And what I found disturbing is that perpetrators are mostly the victims' parents or very close families. In this case, it's never an outsider coming to lure a child in online sexual exploitation. In most cases, the great majority is the parents creating this situation. So it's what we were saying before when we talked about harmful coping strategies. This is the best and most dramatic example, I believe. And we were in fact told by a community member that the number one problem today is online sexual abuse. The number one predators are parents. If not parents, then the siblings. The number one cause is poverty. That's how their family can survive. And then it's really easy money. You just make the child undress there, show on the internet, and make instant money. So many parents may not even think of it as a form of exploitation because it happens on the internet, there's no physical contact, but it goes without saying that the psychological harms for a child is still very much high. And another point worth mentioning here is that the children are very reluctant to tell on their parents. First of all, if it's your parents telling you to do something, as a child, you may think that that's normal. You may not like it, you may feel uncomfortable, but your first instinct as a child is to trust your parents. And secondly, that if you think that something may not quite fit because it's your parents, you don't want to tell them. So there is no situation in which the child would be reporting this form of domestic exploitation to the police. So in conclusion, recognizing that natural hazards, climate change related events, heightened vulnerability to exploitations, actions that address climate change related vulnerabilities seem to become a much needed strategy to end conditions that allow modern slavery and human trafficking to thrive. So if we put it in other words, we suggest that actions that are capable of strengthening communities' resilience vis-a-vis the adverse impact of climate change become fundamental to also strengthen resilience to human trafficking. Now, a few points in terms of recommendations. So having said all that, what next? What should we be doing as a society? Where do the responsibilities lie? This, of course, is not an exhaustive list. It's just some points, some thoughts, and I believe these kind of recommendations can, as our knowledge grows, should always get expanded and become more go more in depth, let's say, of what can be done. So some ideas: strengthen the capacity of local communities in climate change affected areas, so basically help the communities to adequately prepare for and respond to climatic events. Enhance the quality and the quantity of post-disaster assistance. And again, here in these recommendations, especially for the governments, we are having in mind the situations in the Philippines that we explored. We can think together of whether some of these recommendations could work in other settings as well, or how and to what extent they should be adjusted and revised. So recovery should include cash and work programs that seem to work quite well, financial assistance for housing reconstruction, scholarships, holistic healthcare, and very importantly, distribution processes should become equitable and just rather than arbitrary and based on preferences, connections, and other criteria. Also introduce human trafficking consideration in sustainable development programs and climate change policies. I think we see a dominant situation is the one in which the two worlds are acting in isolation. So we have human trafficking experts addressing human trafficking, climate change experts addressing climate change. I think the challenge lying ahead of us is going to be to build a bridge, to make sure that our responses become more intersecting and that they support each other rather than playing in silos and not talking to each other. So add the modern slavery lens to developmental policies and climate policies. But again, this could also be turned into a recommendation for us as human trafficking experts and pay more attention to climate changes, not something that only affects the environment, something that has dramatic implications for human rights, including human trafficking, of course. Then for NGOs, conduct trainings on climate resilient activities, climate smart agriculture, and livelihood diversification. So help people to have better skills that are more attuned to the climatic environment around them, train them in climate smart agricultural practices, and help communities also to diversify and plan their livelihoods. For instance, seasonal calendars can be used in this regard to make sure that the activities that are carried out are appropriate for that specific time of the year and the climatic characteristics associated with that season. And conduct awareness raising campaigns about human trafficking in hazard-affected communities. So anti-trafficking NGOs should conduct awareness raising campaigns, education, and very importantly, this has to happen before a hazard strikes. If we do it after, it's going to be too late. So this has to happen before, and I think here the challenge, something that we're discussing in the Philippines with the local stakeholders, is to identify and recognize climate change hotspots as also possible human trafficking hotspots and perhaps prioritize them or give them a special place in our outreach and education campaigns. And finally, recommendations for community leaders, so address the harmful cultural norms that typically prevail in hazard affected communities. Again, thinking of the Philippines case and not saying that this is true of every other context. But religious leaders, business leaders, educators should use their influence to condemn harmful cultural norms that we saw may prevail in climate change affected contexts and poverty affected communities, such as those norms that encourage children's engagement in labor and in the sex industry. And our related recommendation is to promote a culture of solidarity among community members. We put this recommendation because one thing that we observed is that many times neighbors know exactly what's happening in the neighbor's house, so they do not cases of commercial sexual exploitation of a child, of online sexual exploitation, but the reasoning is because I know that my neighbor is going through a very hard situation, that they lost everything, that they have no income, I will not report them because I understand where this comes from, I understand that they're not bad people, they're just desperate people. And without making any judgment here, but I think there is a sentiment of community solidarity that is now manifesting itself as something negative because it's covering each other up in a crime, in a situation of exploitation. Possibly the community leader could use their influence with the community to turn this into something positive. For instance, having a community pool where everyone contributes so that there is a community fund that can be used to support the most vulnerable community members in a time of need, or other responses along this line. And I think with this, it's all for me, so that we can leave a few minutes for questions, comments, for your own input. And thank you for joining this breakout session. I had a great time, and looking forward to your comments and your insights. And if you didn't have an opportunity yet to download our research report, you can do this on our website using this QR code. There is a full report available in English. Now, any question, any comment, any observation? Yes.
Thank you so much. I think it's a very interesting session on this. We seem to learn actually, and I learned a lot from you too, on the connection between trafficking and climate change. Right? So, in this regard, I would like to ask, in the recommendation that you suggest to the government, why don't you have actually include also component of identification of potential victim of trafficking? Because I think learning from what happened in Indonesia, for example, during the tsunami in Aceh, right? All of a sudden, those recruiter, deceptive with a deceptive way coming over, and then during the other kind of issues related to disaster or even climate change, caused by climate change and so on, it's like these are create vulnerability, like what you explained, and people are become dispirited and so on, and they will just take up whatever offer from those false recruitment process and so on, and kind of that. So in this regard, why not we are also trying to suggest the government in this regard, both the one working on counter-trafficking and the one working on, say, climate issues, disaster issues and kind of that, to join hands. Because it seems like the disconnection is still very wide over there. So when it comes to disaster or issues related to climate change, seems like other agencies dealing with it, and they do not even see the associated risk to trafficking and other kind of forced labor, potential recruitment, and so on. So that's what I think is needed. And the second thing is like how the community, which you already explained, can also engage in early detection of potential recruitment for the purpose of trafficking or other kind of crimes, so that this can also be detected as early as possible. Because I was working with IOM before, and I was sent to Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh when the Rohingya refugees was influx, and then we assessing to what extent potential trafficking might happen. You will be surprised, even death bondage labor were there, and kind of that very rare death bondage labor in accordance with the international definition. And then during the issues in border states in Nigeria. I went there to also doing the same assessment for IDPs camp in the area, and apparently there are quite risk of trafficking there, including to Chiboko and so on, and that was reformed and rescued because they were not accepted and so on and so on. And there are always vulnerability that could lead or make people fall into trafficking. So I think in addition of all your wonderful recommendations, it's very important to also strengthen the victim identifications work in these kind of areas that definitely will be a potential place where the recruiter might targeting those vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you made some excellent points that are certainly contributing to our reflection on what recommendations to think of building on this evidence, and I think the identification of victims is a great point. So thank you for sharing that. And I think when it comes to what the communities can do, we try to have this conversation with the communities that do the research. I think there needs to be a training in that sense. I think that's where NGOs would have to play a very crucial role, because many of them are just not aware of what's happening, not aware of why it's happening, or where the red flags could be. So I think once we empower them with the tools, then they can be very important actors in their own resilience and strengthening their own position in front of the risk of being trafficked. But thank you so much. Anyone else who wants to share something? Yes, thank you.
I really appreciated the presentation, and I just wanted to share a general worry that I think about sometimes when I think about climate change. My big worry is when it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, we'll have more migrants coming, I think, from the global south to the global north. But my big worry is there will be more leaders in the global north who say, build a wall or push them back. And to stay politically alive, those leaders will do anything to survive. And those leaders will, if it becomes bad enough, I think those leaders will say, we have to put these refugees at camps and contain them. And if the refugees keep coming, those leaders might say, we have to kill them to survive. So I worry the consequence of climate change won't be human trafficking, it'll also be genocide. I see that coming. And I don't know how to stop it, because countries like the US, they don't care about climate change. We talk about it, but I don't think we really care, because we're selfish and greedy, and we like to drive our big cars, So that's just a worry I wanted to share. I know that's not very optimistic, but the hope is if we name and talk about it, maybe we can stop it.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing very honestly your concerns, which I think can be shared by anyone in this room. You made a very good point that we're focusing on human trafficking today because that's the space in which we're having this conversation, but that's not the only thing that is going to happen because of the harmful impacts of climate change and our incapacity of dealing with it and addressing this challenge that humanity is facing. We're already late, and even though knowing that we're late, not much is being done, or not enough is being done. So thank you for sharing your concerns, which are certainly shared by most of us.
Marcus, so at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned the concept, I think you said rapid onset climate event, right? A rapid onset climate event, right? A typhoon, tsunami, so on. What's the opposite of that?
Slow onset.
A slow onset climate event. Do you feel that your presentation is mostly focused on the rapid onset findings, recommendations, or does it include both rapid and non-rapid?
Just to make sure that everyone hears. Our research focuses on rapid onset, so mostly typhoons, because that's the kind of event that affected those specific communities that we encounter there. I think in general, from my review of the literature, there tends to be more research done on rapid onset events. So I think one avenue left for us to explore, like, there is many work to be done also on rapid onset events, of course, but slow onset events have remained even more outside of our radar, and I think there remains a lot of work to be done to understand what's different, what kind of risks are unique to slow onset events, and think of abroad. The effects play out more slowly over time, so how do communities perceive those threats, how do they prepare for that, what kind of consequences does this bring, and what risks does it bring. So I think there is a space for more research certainly to be done on this. Because things may be similar, but they may also be very different, as the dynamics of the event are different. Any other thought or question? Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm asking about the online trafficking that you also mentioned. If it has to come in a place, for example, flood, earthquake, so the vulnerable people, they don't have the facilities, as you mentioned, and they don't have like food, they don't have shelter, they don't have these sort of things. So how the traffickers recruited, targeted, and exploited the vulnerable people through using technology at a specific time? How they
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and I think it was in one of the slides, but it's my fault that I didn't emphasize that. So, for instance, in the sex trafficking cases that we saw, because the lack of electricity right after a typhoon, many of those establishments closed. So there was a period of time where there was no activity going on there. Next, sometime after the reconstruction, after the readjustment phase, they reopened and they could prey on many of these families that were still in a situation of poverty, of unemployment, of income loss. When it comes to technology inside the houses, it's something that happened quite a long time after the disaster, but that was, from what the community's self-assessment was still determined by the loss, the desperation that they experienced because of the climatic event. So it didn't happen right after, it didn't happen that there was a typhoon and right after using technology to engage in a situation of exploitation of my child or of someone else, but much time after, when the technology was revealed, when there was access to that kind of activities, the best person that had been created back then in the situation of poverty that was still protracted because it takes time to recover, that led to this situation in which, okay, it's easier to do this rather than finding a source of income. Thank you for your point.
Just to add a little bit, because we're from the Philippines, so it's like why so poor, but then we still get access, online sex trafficking. So it's during like typhoon, what happens is that we go out, the people actually could get like battery charge outside, and Facebook Messenger is free. So even if you don't have data, for as long as like in a day you can have like access, and cell phone is like very basic, like people actually have it like that more than like food. Like, it becomes more of like a need for those that we're actually working with. So that's how it looks like.
Thank you. That was very helpful to understand better from the specific Filipino perspective how that would still be possible given the challenges posed by these events. We have a couple of minutes left. Anyone who wants to add a final thought? Yes?
Di Indonesia perubahan iklim itu banyak terjadi karena proyek strategis negara. Jadi alih fungsi hutan, alih fungsi hutan mangrove maupun hutan tanaman keras itu dilakukan oleh atas nama proyek strategis negara. Nah, baik itu illegal logging dan lain sebagainya. Nah, yang menjadi pertanyaan kita
selalu menjadi keresahan bagi kita bahwa ketika kita mengangkat isu itu termasuk juga trafficking yang terjadi kepada anak-anak maupun orang tuanya, itu selalu kriminalisasi yang selalu terjadi termasuk juga pada kita.
I'll try to translate this. So, in Indonesia, many of the climate change caused by the government national strategy, especially related to coal mining, and also in relation to illegal logging of mangroves turned into palm oil plantations. So the question is, what do you suggest the strategy to address trafficking caused by that, especially for the child labor? The second question is about the challenge for advocacy, because often the activists or the NGOs trying to do advocacy around this, it becomes the victims of criminalization because they against the government strategy projects.
Thank you. We are running out of time, so that was the last question. But you're very right. When it comes to legal activities of logging, of mining, there is the challenge of how to address this, especially because the government is involved or may not have an interest in being part of the solution. We experienced the same thing in Peru, where to address the issues that I was mentioning at the beginning of the gold mining in indigenous communities and the harmful impact on human rights and the environment, climate change. Working with the government is very hard because the government is the one giving the concessions to these mining companies and making money out of it. So we're actually working with the communities at a very grassroots level to make sure that we can make them aware of the risks, make them more resilient, and think together with them of solutions in which they can find alternatives to what would be their typical activities of income generation, think of solutions that will prevent them from looking for a job in the exploitative sector, in the mining sector, where they're victims of labor exploitation and sex trafficking. So I think in that case, working with the community is the only way, because you don't have a government that can be a partner in the business sector even less. So in that sense of isolation, your only partner becomes the community that you want to protect, and that many times is the one with the best tools and the best instruments to think of solutions that are sustainable and appropriate. Thanks, and thanks for having me. Also, thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you later today.
What time was that? 3 or 5.